Right, pull up a chair and listen carefully, because today I am going to share something the English do not like to talk about with outsiders. Every summer, the coaches roll into York and the Cotswolds and the Lake District, and the poor old locals quietly retreat to places the tourists have not yet ruined. I have spent a lifetime walking the back lanes of this country, and I can tell you that the England the postcards sell is not the England the English actually live in. Today, I am going to show you 21 places where the locals still go to breathe, to walk, to eat a pasty in peace, and to pretend for an afternoon that nobody has ever heard of Instagram or afternoon tea. So subscribe, and let's start. Let us begin. Number 21. The village of Blanchland in Northumberland. I'm tucked into a steep wooded valley on the edge of the North Pennines. Blanchland is one of those places the English quietly keep to themselves. The village was built by the Lead Mining Company in the 18th century, using the ruins of a medieval abbey as the foundation for the houses. The abbey itself was a 12th century Premonstratensian monastery, dissolved by Henry VIII in 1539, after which the stone was left to lie for 200 years until the local lord decided to put it to better use. The result is a single main street of honey-coloured stone cottages, an old abbey church, and a pub called the Lord Crewe Arms, which dates back to the 13th century and still serves a proper pint of bitter to the farmers who have come down from the moor. The pub has a stone fireplace so large that, during the 18th century, a Jacobite fugitive is said to have hidden inside the chimney to escape government soldiers. Whether the story is true or not, I cannot say, but the chimney is certainly large enough. There are no souvenir shops. There is no visitor centre. There is a post office that sells sausage rolls and stamps in roughly equal measure. The surrounding moorland is some of the wildest in England, and the locals walk the hills with their dogs and come home to sit by the fire in the pub. A room at the Lord Crewe Arms costs around £130 a night. A walk on the moor costs nothing at all. The nearest tourist coach is, thankfully, 30 miles away and lost. Number 20. The Isle of Portland, off the coast of Dorset. Yes, I know, Dorset is not exactly secret, but Portland is. Technically an island, connected to the mainland by a thin spit of pebble beach called Chesil Beach, Portland has a character all of its own. The island is made almost entirely of limestone, quarried for centuries to build St Paul's Cathedral, Buckingham Palace, and half of central London. The stone is so distinctive that you can walk through London, recognise it, and realise that half the buildings you are looking at began life as a piece of this one small island off the Dorset coast. The people of Portland still speak a slightly different dialect from the rest of Dorset. They have their own superstitions, including a strong aversion to rabbits, which are considered such bad luck that the word itself is not spoken in many households. Quarrymen, seeing a rabbit near the workings, would reportedly down tools and go home for the day. The tradition survives in some of the older families, which I find charming, if impractical. The Western Cliffs are a paradise for climbers and walkers, with paths along the coast that give you nothing but sea on one side and grazing sheep on the other. The nearby Portland Castle, built by Henry VIII in 1539 as part of his chain of coastal defences, still stands overlooking the harbour and costs around £8 to enter. The lighthouse at Portland Bill, first lit in 1716, is open to visitors for around £7. The nearby pub, the Lobster Pot, serves a crab sandwich that would make a grown man weep. The tourists, sensibly, all go to Weymouth next door. Number 19. Dentdale in the Yorkshire Dales. Everyone has heard of the Yorkshire Dales. Almost nobody has heard of Dentdale. And this narrow valley, tucked away in the western corner of the national park, is the quiet cousin of the busier Wensleydale and Swaledale. The village of Dent itself has cobbled streets, a church dating from the 12th century, and a single pub, the Sun Inn, which has been pulling pints since the 16th century. The surrounding hills are crisscrossed with ancient dry stone walls, built over 1,000 years of patient labour, and the farms up on the fells have been worked by the same families for generations. The Settle to Carlisle Railway runs through the Dale, with a station at Dent that is the highest mainline station in England, sitting at around 350 metres above sea level, and so remote that the station had to be built with its own weatherproofing against the wind. A return ticket from Leeds costs around £30. Once you are there, everything is free, including the silence. Number 18. Wasdale, in Cumbria. I know what you're thinking. Cumbria is the Lake District. The Lake District is the most congested corner of the country on a bank holiday. But Wasdale is different. Wasdale is the valley the tourists never quite reach, because the road is long, the signposts are few, and the pub at the end only has about 12 rooms. The valley contains waste water, the deepest lake in England at 79 metres, surrounded by some of the highest mountains in the country, including Scafell Pike. The view from the western shore of the lake, looking across to the dark screes on the opposite side, was voted the best view in Britain by viewers of a national television programme. And the screes themselves are a vast fan of loose broken rock running from the summit of Ilgill Head directly into the lake, tilted at an angle that defies walking and discourages even experienced scramblers. The coaches cannot get down the narrow road to reach it. The Wasdale Head Inn, at the top of the valley, has been serving walkers and climbers since 1856, with rooms from around £120 a night. The climbers who invented British rock climbing did so on the crags above the pub. The pub retains its collection of photographs of the early pioneers, men in tweed jackets and hobnailed boots clinging to rock faces in a manner that would today be considered lunacy. The tiny church of St. Olaf, a little way down the valley, is the smallest parish church in England, and with a roof beam said to have come from a Viking longship. Whether the story is true is open to debate, but the beam is certainly very old and very weathered. The locals who drink at the Wasdale Head Inn now are mostly farmers, shepherds, and the occasional weather-beaten climber who looks as though he has forgotten how to speak in sentences. Number 17. Walberswick in Suffolk, a small village on the Suffolk coast sitting across the River Blyth from the more famous Southwold. Walberswick was once a thriving medieval port. The church, built in the 14th century, was so large and so ambitious that the villagers eventually ran out of money to maintain it, and the main body of the building was partially demolished in the 17th century. The ruins still stand, then with the smaller surviving chapel tucked inside the skeleton of the original nave. The village has 2 pubs, a small art gallery, and a ferry that runs across the river to Southwold during the summer for about £2.50. Walberswick has become a quiet refuge for the people who used to live in Southwold before it was discovered by London bankers. The writer W.G. Sebald walked this coast and wrote about it in a book that I find very slow and very beautiful, in roughly equal measure. Fish and chips from the harbour hut cost around £9. A walk on the marsh costs nothing, assuming you can outrun the mosquitoes. Number 16. The Lizard Peninsula in Cornwall. Everyone goes to Land's End. Nobody goes to the Lizard. Which is odd, because the Lizard is, in every meaningful respect, a better place. It is the most southerly point in mainland Britain, a wild headland of serpentine rock, hidden coves, and tiny fishing villages like Cagworth and Church Cove, where fishermen still drag their boats up the beach at the end of the day. The Cornish path runs along the cliffs, offering views that cannot be photographed because no camera knows what to do with the colour of the sea. The serpentine rock itself, the geological feature that gives the peninsula its distinctive character, is an extremely rare form of metamorphosed ocean floor, found in only a handful of places in the world. It is streaked with green, red, and black, and when polished, it looks like a slice of marbled meat. The Lizard Village has a small collection of shops selling genuine Cornish serpentine carvings, a craft that has been practiced here for over 150 years. Queen Victoria, on a visit in 1846, ordered a pair of serpentine mantelpieces for Osborne House, which launched a brief fashion for the stone that kept the local carvers in business for a generation. The local pub, the Top House, has stood since 1700 and something, and serves a pasty you can hold upright by the pastry crimp, as God intended. Parking at Kynance Cove, which is the most beautiful beach on the peninsula, costs around £8 for the day. The views cost nothing. Number 15. The Doon Valley, on the border between Somerset and Devon. This is Exmoor country, and the Doon Valley is the half-hidden heart of it. The valley was made famous by the novel Lorna Doone, written by R.D. Blackmore in 1869, which romanticised a remote moorland community of outlaws and feuding families into one of the best-selling books of the Victorian era. The curious thing is that Blackmore, who had grown up in the area, drew on genuine local folklore about a family of robbers who reportedly lived in the valley in the 17th century. Whether the Doones were real in the form the novel describes is doubtful, but the landscape is absolutely real, and walking up the Badgeworthy water from the village of Malmsmead into the narrow wooded cleft where the valley hides, you get a sense of a place that time has more or less given up on. The moor rises in every direction. The stream runs shallow over flat stones. Red deer watch you from the higher ground. In winter, snow fills the valley, and the only sound is the water. The buttery at Malmsmead serves tea and scones at reasonable prices, and there are a handful of small bed and breakfasts in the surrounding farms, most of them around £70 a night. Exmoor itself is the smaller, quieter of the two southwestern national parks, with a population of under 10,000 people spread across nearly 700 square kilometres. Dartmoor gets the visitors, the military training, and the tabloid attention. Exmoor gets the red deer, the wild ponies, and the sort of walkers who want to be left alone. The locals come here because Exmoor is, and has always been, the quieter national park, overlooked in favour of Dartmoor to the south, and that suits everybody here just fine. Number 14, Robin Hood's Bay on the Yorkshire coast. A cliffside village of red-roofed cottages tumbling down a steep, cobbled street to a sheltered bay. Robin Hood's Bay is not exactly a secret, but it is not on the main tourist trail either, because the coaches cannot negotiate the hill, and the parking at the top costs £6.50 and fills by 10 in the morning. The village was a notorious smuggling haven in the 18th and 19th centuries, with tunnels and hidden rooms running between the houses. It is said that a bale of silk could be moved from the beach to the top of the village without ever seeing daylight. The local tradition holds that in 1785, a single smuggling run landed 250 kegs of brandy on the beach, all of which vanished into the village within an hour and was never recovered by the revenue officers who arrived that afternoon. And the bay itself is a wave-cut platform of Jurassic rock, studded with fossils. Families walk the beach at low tide with plastic buckets, collecting ammonites and belemnites and small scandalized crabs. The nearest pub, the Laurel Inn, is so small that if you sneeze at the bar, you will hit the man at the dartboard. Pint prices around £5, crab sandwiches around £8, worth every penny. Number 13, the Kielder Forest in Northumberland, the largest man-made forest in England, covering over 650 square kilometres, with the largest artificial lake in northern Europe at its centre. The forest was planted after the First World War to supply timber for the mines and the railways. The lake was created in the 1970s by damming the North Tyne. The creation of the lake required the flooding of an entire valley, including the village of Plashetts, which now lies beneath several metres of water. In dry summers, when the water level drops, the old stone walls and roads of the drowned village occasionally emerge above the surface, which is the sort of detail that attracts the morbidly curious and deters absolutely everyone else. The combination of forest and lake gives you an enormous area of Sitka spruce, broken by open water, with almost no human population. The Kielder Dark Sky Reserve has some of the least light-polluted skies in Britain. On a clear winter night, you can see the Milky Way running directly overhead, the Andromeda Galaxy as a smudge above the trees, and if you are lucky, the Aurora Borealis rippling along the northern horizon. The Kielder Observatory offers public viewing evenings for around £25. Accommodation in the forest ranges from lodges at around £150 a night to wild camping, which is technically restricted but sensibly tolerated in certain areas. The locals go to Kielder because they can walk for hours without meeting another human being. Number 12. Staithes on the Yorkshire coast. A fishing village so tightly wedged into a cleft in the cliffs that the houses seem to be holding each other up. Staithes was once one of the largest fishing ports on the northeast coast, with over 70 cobbles, the traditional flat-bottomed fishing boats of the Yorkshire coast. Today the fleet has shrunk to a handful. The village was home, briefly, to a young Captain James Cook, who worked here as a grocer's apprentice before running away to sea. The shop he worked in was destroyed by a landslip in the 19th century. The replacement building bears a plaque. Between roughly 1880 and 1914, Staithes also hosted a small artist colony known as the Staithes Group, who came for the extraordinary quality of the Northern Light and produced a body of work now scattered across regional galleries. Most of them left before the First World War. The village has forgotten them more or less completely, which is, I think, exactly how they would have wanted it. The village pub, the Cod and Lobster, has been washed away by storms at least 3 times in its history, and rebuilt each time, stubbornly, in exactly the same spot. A pint at the Cod and Lobster costs around £5.50. A walk from Staithes along the cliff path to Runswick Bay, another impossibly pretty fishing village, takes about 2 hours and is, in my opinion, one of the finest coastal walks in England. Let us pause. Subscribe to prove that these videos actually help and actually make sense. Because if nobody watches, I shall simply retreat to one of these villages, order a pint, and never be heard from again, which, on reflection, may not be the worst outcome. Number 11. The Hebden Bridge Hills in West Yorkshire. Hebden Bridge itself has become somewhat known in recent years, with its bookshops and organic cafes, and a population heavy on artists, writers, and people who have strong opinions about cheese. But the hills above the town are where the locals go. The Pennine Way runs through Hebden. And within 10 minutes of walking uphill, you are out on the moor, surrounded by heather, millstone grit, and the kind of wind that teaches you humility. The village of Heptonstall, sitting on the ridge above Hebden, is older than Hebden itself, with a ruined medieval church that was abandoned in the 19th century when a new church was built alongside it, and the 2 churches still stand side by side, one a roofless shell and one a functioning parish. The ruined church was damaged by a great storm in 1847, which tore off the roof and left the stone walls standing open to the weather. The parishioners, rather than repair it, chose to build afresh. The poet Sylvia Plath is buried in the churchyard. People still leave pens on her grave. The pub in Heptonstall, the White Lion, serves a Sunday roast that locals queue for well before opening time. On a clear day, the view from the moor above Heptonstall reaches across 3 Yorkshire valleys, with smoke rising from the farms and the distant rumble of tractors drifting up the hillside. Number 10. The Isles of Scilly, off the Cornish coast. 28 miles off the mainland, accessible only by ferry, helicopter, or a nerve-shredding propeller aircraft. The Scilly Isles are an archipelago of 5 inhabited islands and over 100 uninhabited ones. The weather is milder than anywhere else in England. The beaches are white sand. The sea, on a good day, is genuinely turquoise. And no, I'm not making that up. The population of the islands is around 2,200, which doubles in summer. The locals know every square metre of every island, and they have their favourite quiet corners that they do not share with the day trippers. The ferry from Penzance, the Cylonian 3, costs around £70 return. The flight from Land's End costs more like £160. Accommodation on the islands is not cheap. A simple bed and breakfast will set you back around £100 a night in summer. But the islands have a quality of light, a slowness of pace, and a sense of distance from the rest of England that is difficult to put into words. Number 9. Pilsley in the Peak District. Most tourists in Derbyshire go to Bakewell, eat a tart, and leave. The locals know that Pilsley, just up the road, is a prettier village with a better pub and no queue for a parking space. The village sits on the Chatsworth estate, owned by the Duke of Devonshire, and has the distinct air of a place that has been tidied up by someone who knows exactly what a perfect English village should look like. The cottages are stone and thatch. The lanes are narrow. The pub, the Devonshire Arms, serves a pie that I would happily stake my reputation on. The Chatsworth Farm Shop, a short walk away, sells meat, cheese, bread and game from the estate, and is considered by many to be the finest farm shop in the country. The nearby Chatsworth House, the seat of the Duke, costs around £28 to enter. The village itself and the footpaths through the estate cost nothing. A pint at the Devonshire Arms costs around £5. Bakewell is 4 miles away, full of coaches, and you should let them have it. Number 8. Bosigran, on the North Cornish coast. Not a village, not a town. Not even really a place in the usual sense. Bosigran is a stretch of wild granite cliff between St Ives and Zena, accessible only on foot from a small car park above the coast. The cliffs have been used for rock climbing since the late 19th century. The routes have names like Suicide Wall and Doorpost, which give you a general sense of the atmosphere. Below the cliffs is a rocky beach accessible only at low tide, where seals haul out and basking sharks occasionally appear offshore in summer. There is no cafe. There is no shop. There is no signal. The path that runs along the cliffs is part of the South West Coast Path, and it passes through some of the oldest surviving field systems in Britain, with small stone-walled fields that have been cultivated since the Bronze Age. Parking is free, if you can find a space, and everything else is free too. Number 7. The Slad Valley in Gloucestershire. This is Laurie Lee country. The writer of Cider with Rosie, one of the finest books ever written about childhood in rural England, grew up in the village of Slad and spent his life walking these hills. The valley is a narrow, steep-sided cleft in the Cotswolds, much greener and wilder than the manicured villages further east. The Woolpack Inn, the pub where Laurie Lee drank for most of his adult life, is still there, serving the same kind of ploughman's lunch it served him. The interior is largely unchanged since the mid-20th century, with the same flagstone floor, the same creaking wooden settles, and a small library of Lee's books available for regulars to browse between pints. Lee is buried in the churchyard across the road. His headstone reads simply, Laurie Lee, 1914 to 1997, and underneath, he lies in the valley he loved. The valley is protected from development under an arrangement that Lee himself helped to set up in the 1980s, when he successfully campaigned against plans to build housing estates on the hillsides. The footpaths are well maintained. The coaches do not stop here. A pint at the Woolpack costs around £6. The local cheese from the nearby Godsell's Dairy is sold in the village shop. Take your time. Laurie Lee did. Number 6. The Holderness Coast in East Yorkshire. This is the fastest eroding coastline in Europe. The cliffs here are made of soft glacial till, and the sea eats them at an average rate of 2 meters per year. Entire villages have been lost to the sea since Roman times. At least 29 settlements are now underwater off the Holderness coast, including the medieval port of Ravensor-Odd, which rivaled Hull in the 14th century and had its own Member of Parliament before being washed away in a single great storm in 1362. The current villages, like Skipsea and Oldborough and Mappleton, are all slowly being eaten. Houses sit at the edge of the cliff, with evacuation notices pinned to the doors. Streets end abruptly in thin air. Occasionally, a house that was standing last autumn is not there the following spring, having quietly toppled into the sea during the winter storms. Most tourists do not come here because there is nothing cheerful to see. But there is a strange beauty to the place, a sense of the landscape actively in the process of vanishing. That is found nowhere else in England. A caravan site sells you a pitch for the week for around £180. The owner may or may not still be there next summer. The sea does not care. Number 5. Helmsley in the North York Moors. A handsome market town with a ruined 12th century castle in the middle and the moors rising on every side. Helmsley is on the map, but it is not on the main tourist trail because Whitby steals all the attention on the coast and York steals all the attention inland. The town has a fine cobbled square, a selection of small independent shops, and a decent range of pubs and cafes. The castle, managed by English Heritage, costs around £8 to enter. The walled garden, just up the road, is one of the best kept secrets in the north, with around 10,000 plant species and a spectacular collection of fruit trees trained flat against the old stone walls. The nearby Rievaulx Abbey, a ruined Cistercian monastery in a wooded valley, is one of the most beautiful ruins in England and, like Helmsley, is quieter than it has any right to be. Number 4. The Dungeness Headland in Kent. This is, I promise you, one of the strangest places in England, and the fact that it appears on so few itineraries tells you everything about the limitations of mass tourism. Dungeness is a vast shingle plain on the south coast, home to Britain's only desert, 2 lighthouses, a decommissioned nuclear power station, a small steam railway, a collection of abandoned fishing boats, and the former home of the film director Derek Jarman, with its famous garden of driftwood sculptures and flowering sea kale. The atmosphere is genuinely unearthly, the light is strange, the wind never quite stops. The shingle itself is one of the largest such formations in the world, covering roughly 12 square kilometers, and it is still growing as the longshore drift moves pebbles along the coast and dumps them at the headland. The nuclear power station, Dungeness B, operated from 1983 until 2021, when it was shut down early due to engineering problems. It still sits there, a vast concrete presence on the shingle, gradually being decommissioned over the coming decades. The Romney, Hythe and Dymchurch Railway, a 15-inch gauge steam line running for about 14 miles along the coast, so delivers passengers to the headland throughout the summer, with tickets at around £20 for adults. Artists and writers come here because nothing else in England looks like it. The Britannia Inn, the local pub, has been serving pints to fishermen and eccentrics for well over a century. The nearby smokery sells smoked fish that has been cured in sheds that are older than most countries. A portion of smoked mackerel costs around £6. The whole headland costs nothing if you bring your own sandwiches. Number 3. The Hartland Peninsula in Devon. Everyone goes to Cornwall, nobody goes to North Devon. Nobody except the people who know that the Hartland coast has some of the most spectacular cliff scenery in Britain, and almost no coaches at all. The cliffs here are a geological marvel, folded and contorted by ancient tectonic forces into dramatic zigzag patterns visible from the coast path. The Devonian and Carboniferous sandstones here were compressed and twisted during the Variscan mountain building event around 300 million years ago, and the resulting folds make the cliffs look as though they have been crumpled by an enormous hand. The village of Hartland Quay has a pub, the Hartland Quay Hotel, perched on the edge of the cliff, serving pints to walkers who have come down off the coast path looking relieved to still be alive. The nearby village of Clovelly is a privately owned village of cobbled streets running down a near vertical cliff to a small harbour where supplies are still delivered by sledge because no wheeled vehicle can negotiate the gradient. The village has been owned by the same family, the Hamlins, since 1738, and the continuity of ownership has preserved it in a form that no publicly administered village could ever match. Entry to Clovelly costs around £9, which I consider excellent value for walking into what is, effectively, a preserved medieval village. Number 2. The Fens in Cambridgeshire and Lincolnshire. Most tourists avoid the Fens because they are flat. I consider this the greatest failure of imagination in modern tourism. The Fens are not boring. They are the oldest landscape in England still under active management. The ground beneath the Fens is peat, up to 10 metres thick in places, laid down over thousands of years. The land was drained in the 17th century by Dutch engineers working on a scale that almost nobody grasps today. The principal engineer, as Cornelius Vermuyden, was brought over by the Earl of Bedford in 1630, and his team spent decades cutting channels, building embankments, and installing pumping stations to lower the water table by several metres. The project was opposed by local fen communities known as the Fen Tigers, who made their living from eels, fish and wildfowl, and who quite correctly understood that drainage would destroy their way of life. Thousands of miles of dikes, ditches and pumping stations still keep the land dry. Without them, most of Cambridgeshire would return to marsh within a decade. The peat itself has shrunk as it dried, so the ground level in many parts of the Fens is now below sea level and falling by around 1 centimetre a year. The skies over the Fens are enormous. The villages are isolated. The churches are medieval and vast because the medieval economy here, before drainage, was fabulously rich from eels and wildfowl. Ely Cathedral, the ship of the Fens, rises above the flat land, visible from 40 miles away. Entry is around £9.50. The surrounding villages, the old droving roads, and the endless skies are free. The locals walk the Fens because nobody else bothers. Let that work in your favour. Number 1, and I have saved the finest for last, the Isle of Purbeck in Dorset. Technically not an island, but a peninsula. The Isle of Purbeck is a chalk and limestone headland between Poole Harbour and Lulworth Cove, containing some of the most beautiful coastline in southern England, some of the oldest quarries, some of the quietest villages, and some of the finest pubs in the country. In the village of Corfe Castle sits beneath the ruins of a medieval castle blown up by the parliamentarians in 1646 after the longest siege of the English Civil War, during which the castle was held by Lady Mary Banks and a garrison of about 80 men against a besieging force of several thousand. Lady Banks held out for 3 years before the castle was betrayed from within. The castle stones were tumbled deliberately to prevent its reuse and still lie where they fell, making the ruins look like the aftermath of a geological cataclysm. The village of Worth Matravers has a pub called the Square and Compass, which has been in the same family for over a century, serves only pies and pasties, has no hot food menu, and sells beer brewed on the premises. The pub also contains a small museum of local fossils and artefacts, entirely free to visit, curated by the landlord himself over several decades. The nearby cliffs at St Aldhelm's Head are honeycombed with medieval and Victorian stone quarries. The local Purbeck marble, which is not actually marble but a dense shelly limestone, was prized throughout medieval England and can be seen in the pillars of Salisbury Cathedral, Westminster Abbey, and Canterbury Cathedral. The coast between Dancing Ledge and Winspit, where the cliffs have been cut into vast flat shelves by quarrymen, is one of the most dramatic stretches of walking in England. A pint at the Square and Compass costs around £4.50. A pasty costs around £3.50. A walk along the cliffs costs nothing at all. The tourists go to Lulworth. The locals come here. So there you have it. And 21 places in England where the locals quietly disappear when the coaches arrive. A village built from the stones of an abandoned abbey. An island where the word rabbit is forbidden. A valley deeper and wilder than the Lake District will admit. A Suffolk village with a half-demolished church. A peninsula in Cornwall that nobody seems to remember exists. An Exmoor valley haunted by fictional outlaws. A fossil-strewn bay at the bottom of a cobbled cliff. A dark sky forest larger than most small countries. A Yorkshire village clinging to a cleft in the rock. The hills above a town that pretends it is bigger than it is. An archipelago of turquoise water 28 miles off Cornwall. A Chatsworth estate village with a pie worth dying for. A cliff you have to climb to reach. A valley where a great writer drank every night. A coast that is literally falling into the sea. A market town with a walled garden of 10,000 plants. A shingle desert with a nuclear power station for company. A Devon peninsula where the cliffs are folded like a fan. A drained fenland of skies and eels. A Dorset peninsula with a pub that sells only pies. These are the England the English reserve for themselves. The coaches will find them eventually. They always do. But for now, if you move quietly, walk early, and avoid announcing your arrival on social media, you can still taste the country as it actually is. Mind how you go. And if you ever find yourself in a pub where the bar is 3 planks wide and the menu is written in chalk by a hand that has not been corrected for 40 years, order whatever the old men at the bar are drinking and stay as long as you are welcome. Which, if you behave yourself, is usually longer than you would expect.